Let's talk about energy flows, how to work with the natural energy of the mind, which often gets pent up with all the distracting thoughts and feelings that are usually running around in our head all day. This energy that we get stuck with is a tremendous source of energy for our lives. It's not necessarily, I guess you could say, aligned best. And I think we feel this, but we don't necessarily know what to do with it. We have all of this tremendous energy pent up inside us, and we just don't know how to make it flow. So let's discuss the different ways that we can do that. So, distractions. Here's all these different thoughts, feelings, memories, ideas, the usual things which are stuck in our minds all day, and which we notice the moment we try to sit down and meditate. How do we work with these distractions? It's certainly a lot of energy, and it's blocking what we're trying to get to. But what is it that we're trying to get to? How do we understand these distractions, what they are, where they come from, what to do with them? Well, it seems to me that the model that we usually use is that our minds are like a bucket. And the distractions, let's make them blue, have filled up the bucket of our mind. To the point where, it's overflowing, right? There's just too much. So we know we have to do something about this. This is not a very good state of being for a human to exist in. There's certainly a lot of energy, which I want to keep repeating. This energy can be good, but there's something a bit off, right? We know we need to do something. So what is it that we do? Well, if we're Buddhist and we go to retreats and read Buddhist books, the usual answer is to do noting methods, to identify and name these distractions one at a time, return to the breath when we can, wait for distractions to come up, which is pretty much instantly, right? And then note them with our attention. So here's us, the eye of our own attention. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we have all these rushing thoughts and feelings, and so, okay, we note one, zero in on one in particular, and then we let it go, so to speak. That's what everyone always says. Now, in truth, the letting go process isn't really a choice. When you bring attention to a distraction, it pretty much just sort of goes away by itself. It's sort of like our attention is a laser. Pew, pew. And each thing that we look at sort of turns to steam and just sort of vanishes. And so we do this over and over and over and over and over and over. To what end? What's the goal here? Well, of course, to get fewer, to reduce this level. So maybe we just have a few left, right? Then we fry those, and one by one, and suddenly it's all gone. That's the idea, right? And this does work. It takes quite a bit of time. When I was on a retreat, it took at least a couple weeks. I had to do the noting practice every day. And more importantly, I had to do it with very clear intention that I'm noticing each of these thoughts, specifically not to dwell on them, but specifically to be aware of them, And sure enough, after a couple weeks, I could feel the level of distraction in my mind decreasing and decreasing. And then it got to a point one evening where I could feel like I was close. You could sort of sense there's just a little bit more sloshing around in the bottom of the pan. And then suddenly, no more distractions. I was completely focused. So that works. And then what? Well, I guess, we still exist. There's still us down here. So then you sort of perform the classic Buddhist observe yourself as a self, and bam, you're gone. And then what? Well, you sort of have this consciousness that's everywhere, and you observe the entire gosh darn thing. And bam, enlightenment. Ta-da! That's the idea, right? That's the model we all have in our heads. At least I did. That we just keep on noting. You get down to the point where there's no more distractions, and then you do the real meditation, right? Which is you start to you observe yourself, you observe the background, and then poof, you're in the fantastic nothingness. Well, it sounds great, but honestly, it's nice. It's a nice state of mind to be in. It is a fantastic feeling to finally be without all these distractions, I admit. And it's incredibly satisfying to know that these methods that we're taught do actually work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of going on retreats. It takes a lot of intention, but it's possible. But is this really the best idea? My thoughts on this have changed over the years. I know that I can get to the point where there's nothing, but we are humans in a world, and we are also minds attached to a body. This model that I think we all more or less have of the jug of our minds and then the distractions, it's a rather isolated perspective, right? There's just sort of us, and that's kind of it. The distractions, well, who knows where they came from, but let's get rid of them, right? And then once they're gone, then good riddance. Well, this does work. It's extremely hardcore. It's what yogis love to do, but it's hard, and actually, ultimately, the worst part is that it's just too difficult to do in everyday life. Can't go on retreats all the time unless we're, actual yogis, but, well, there are actually other ways. There are other ways to work with distractions that I encountered from other traditions in Buddhism, lesser well known, where we can work with these distractions in a different way, which is quite a bit easier than the really hardcore noting methods. And in some ways works just as well. Although it does take a fairly high level of self-awareness, I would say. It's probably wise that teachers everywhere typically, they always recommend noting practice first. Perhaps we all need to practice noting method and zeroing in our thoughts one by one to be able to actually know that we have a mind and that there are things that are there. That is an extremely valuable insight. We have to know that there's this jug here before we can develop a more sophisticated or more compassionate model towards ourselves with it. So, fair enough. But to be honest, I think we've all done noting method long enough. I think we're all familiar with it. I think we understand it perfectly. I think we've all had at least some success with it, even if you never get down to the point of zero distraction, which I don't think is necessary, honestly. So let's talk about some other ways to think about this bucket of distraction in the mind. Okay? We'll keep this model, the bucket with the distraction, but let's take a step back. Let's understand Well, the environment that this bucket exists in. And the first question is, well, where do these distractions come from? And that's, it's a bit hard to know. They come from the world, they come from the body. It's just energy, right? It's just the energy of life, the energy of the body. So that's a bit complicated, but, this is an extremely simple model. So anything that's slightly more sophisticated will help, I think. So let's just come up with something. Let's say that there is a tremendously huge reservoir, a water tank essentially, some sort of structure. I don't know. A huge reservoir of this energy. I've drawn them to the same size, but let's just say this one's like 1 billion times bigger, right? All this energy, the energy where our distractions come from, it has to come from somewhere, right? It's not our minds. I guess you could say it's the body, perhaps. We could call it that. Body. We can call this mind and body, how about? Keep it simple. Mind. So, yeah, I think this makes sense. The body is where we get our life energy from. We eat food, we drink water, it combines into all the chemicals of life, and that chemical energy sustains our brain, which sustains our mind to some extent. And that's where distractions come from. It's really comes down to the physical energy of the body. Well, wherever it comes from. Let's just imagine that there's this source. And there's some sort of tubing, a channel, you might say, for this energy to come out and fill up our mind with all these distractions. So even if we can get to the point where we've eliminated all of these distractions, we've been on retreat for weeks, we've noted every single thought and feeling, and congratulations, now here we are. We did it. There's just a few left. Well, if we lose attention for just a second, everything will fill back up again. And that's unfortunately what happens. As long as our bodies are alive, this distraction energy is constantly being manufactured. So if you really want to be a yogi, you have got to monitor this all the time. You have got to not just pay attention here to note these, but you also have to pay attention here, laser-like focus, so that you can block off whatever is happening here. And in fact, there are ways, little levers, valves, that you can turn on and off. There are various ways to do this. Fasting can decrease the level of energy in the body. Following the Buddhist precepts, the whole deal, no drugs, blah, 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 can turn off these, or at least you can't turn them off completely because then you'd be dead, but you can tighten these all a bit, and you can tighten them as much as possible, and you can get it down to a single trickle. And if you want to do this, you can. I mean, that's what those methods are for. You can get to the point where there's nothing left. Except for just a few drops that still get through. And you hear yogis complaining about this sometimes. The more successful you are, the more you start to obsess over each little last drop because each one starts to be a problem. It's a little bit ridiculous. Well, it's admirable. It's impressive. It's awesome if people can still maintain this level of discipline and attention. That's pretty cool. But again, it's just not very sustainable. All these valves that are connecting our body energy to our mind, well, there's a ton of them. And life keeps getting in the way. Life interacts with all of these and untightens them when we're not looking and just messes everything up, which is why it's so hard to maintain this level of spiritual discipline outside of a meditation center. Even just loud noises, like being in a city, can unloosen these valves and cause our minds to fill back up in an instant. So it's not really appropriate for everyday life. So we need another alternative. What else can we do? Well, we can not worry so much about our body energy or our mind energy. We can keep these kind of full. Maybe not overflowing. I think we all know the experience of that where, panic attacks, chronic anxiety. We need to have some way to prevent the overflowing. So, if we learn on retreat, if we learn how to tighten these screws a bit, then we can do that. But there's another option too, which I like the best. There's ways to also let this mind energy naturally drain out to who knows where it might get off to. I like this. I like this method because it feels the most natural. If you have an outlet for this mental energy, then you don't have to obsess over the valves that are coming in, and you don't have to obsess over noting all the time, both of which are quite exhausting. If you can find just a couple of valves here, find how to twist these, then you can actually set up a really wonderful flow. Because if you think about it, where is this going? It's sort of, where does mental energy go when we can find a way to get it someplace? Well, it could just go out back into the world. So if we exercise, if we use our mental energy and our mental energy motivates us to go out and take a 10-mile bike ride, then we can burn it off. And in fact, that's one way that we naturally have. That's one of these valves that we have for decreasing this. And it's probably the one that we all use the most. We have a tremendous amount of energy, so we go for a run. I think in the West, that is what we're taught to do. And it works. It absolutely does work. It is completely legitimate as a spiritual experience, as a spiritual method. And of course, it keeps our bodies healthy. It's wonderful. This is a fantastic way. And if you think about it, this energy that goes back out, well, it goes through natural cycles through the entire planet. The energy that we give off, gives other things life. We might use up our energy gardening, and then that energy goes in the plants, and then, well, what happens? Well, we eat the vegetables from our garden, and that energy comes back into our bodies. Fills up our body energy, which then fills up our mind energy, and it's this wonderful circle of life. Getting this in a comfortable loop, well, this is life. This is all sorts of things. I mean, if you can get this cycle going, that's everything. That's happiness, meaning. And it's a very decent description of meaning. Like if you can have this flow, it feels meaningful. It actually feels, meaning is a very strange word, but really one way to understand it is that you feel like you're a part of, well, the world. And by connecting our physical and mental energy back to the world, I mean, in whatever way that we can, then that brings meaning to all of our lives. I mean, and it can happen in any way. Perhaps we use this mental energy, we use it in a different tap, not the exercise one. We use it for business. We use our mental energy to innovate, to come up with, new things, new businesses, and we succeed. And that success makes our business bigger, which allows us to hire people and support them. You see, it's another cycle. The critical thing, it seems, is to find a way to use this mental energy. It's not about shutting things off. It's about opening them up. And the more valves that we can open, the bigger the flow through here, the more that we can also allow our body energy to flow through, the more we can, things can get really energetic. Things can get really powerful. We can lead fantastic lives filled with energy this way. And then on the other hand, if something cuts us off, then all sorts of terrible things can happen. Of course, sickness might prevent. We need a way for energy to return. There's some sort of like funnel here where energy can return back from the universe. Sickness can prevent energy from returning. Something might shut us off here. And if our body doesn't get energy, we die, of course. Or if we don't get enough, then not enough energy gets to the mind and we don't have, we're not at our peak. Or something can disconnect this or reduce this connection between body and mind. For example, if we have a very poor diet, then that can shut off these valves, but not in a yogic way, but in a very unhealthy way. So our body might have plenty of energy, but things just get a bit messed up and we can't use it properly. Or, perhaps most likely, we just can't find enough valves to open up our mind energy to the world. I think this might be the most common one. Or at least, it's the hardest one to deal with. I think we understand eating well, keeping our bodies fit. We understand. We know we do have a couple of these valves that allow us to use our mental energy in some ways. But you know what? It seems like we're dealing with just a tremendous bubbling of mental energy. There's just so much of it these days for all sorts of reasons, right? We are not suffering from a lack of mental energy. Well, it feels that way often, of course. We're exhausted and burnt out, of course. But I think part of why we're burnt out is because there's just so much energy and it's not going to the right place that it can shut everything down. I mean, what happens when this energy overflows its bottle, but we're not using it to get back out? We're not using that energy to return to our bodies or the world. I don't know, but all sorts of bad things can cause this. This isn't good. I don't know. When this energy gets misdirected somewhere outside of this natural flow of life force, then it's like there's other machines out here, right? There's other like parts of our mind and body that have a purpose. I'm trying to make a gear here. And this energy just sort of causes who knows, all sorts of bugs in the machine, right? So as a rule of thumb, I think we're all dealing with too much mental energy. Our bodies are healthy, our minds are healthy in the sense that there's plenty of energy there, but we just don't know what to do with that energy. And actually, exercising is not enough sometimes. Not even, a 20-mile, 100-mile bike ride might not even be enough for some people. I think we all are kind of familiar with people, perhaps ourselves, who we're exercising too much. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it seems like we have loosened the exercise valve as much as we can, right? We go for runs, we do weightlifting. I mean, this is operating at 100%. We have loosened this as much as it can possibly go. And at some point, taking yet another bike ride it doesn't actually help, right? It doesn't have as much effect as we would want to. So we need other ways. We need to find other valves that can let this mental energy out. So finally, we get to the point that I'm trying to make, which is that one of these other valves can be worked with visualization, with the visuals. Okay? Through visualization, we can find a way to unloosen some of these other valves, get things moving. And the way that I like to do this is actually super simple. Just imagine your distractions as a waterfall. Why not? Instead of conceptualizing our mind as a jug with distractions, here's the usual model. What if we get rid of that jug, which is just an image anyway? It's just one image. And let's just imagine these distractions as flowing. They're not tumbling around in circles. It's flowing from who knows where to who knows where, but this sense, this flow, okay? Just picture this. Just imagine a waterfall. That's it. That is my only point. Certainly it took me a long time to get to this point, but just simply visualizing a waterfall in a way where where you imagine that waterfall is your distractions. That simple act of visualizing can unloosen the valve and let your mental energy flow. And that's basically it. By visualizing distractions as a flow, it's like you give your mind permission to loosen one of those valves. That seems to be it. Our minds are very powerful, and in some sense, they're a bit like a machine. With intentional visualizations, we can change how the machinery of the mind is operating. And the important thing to realize is that we are always visualizing. We always have a model in mind. And that model tells our minds how to use mental energy. So if we visualize our minds as just this bucket of distraction, which I think is what we're doing usually, if we're being honest, that tells our mind to treat itself like a bucket of distraction with no way out. If we choose a different model for how the mind operates, the mind might approach itself differently. So by visualizing a waterfall, that is telling the mind, you could say like programming the mind to open up flow. Think about it this way. By imagining a waterfall here with some, don't have to imagine where it's going even. Who knows? Just somewhere. And who knows where it's coming from? Who knows? You'd leave that up to your mind to decide. All you're saying is, look, all of these thoughts and feelings that we've noted, it's okay if they just flow. By visualizing our distractions as a flow, that gives us permission to accept them. If we don't visualize it as a waterfall or some sort of river, perhaps, then that is telling our mind to automatically to intervene, to put up a wall here. Our minds listen to us. Our minds are eager for our input. And if we tell it, no, it's not a waterfall, it's this bucket and I'm trying to deal with it, it will stop this flow. And then we have to deal with it, and we better be ready for that. If we visualize it as a flow, then it will think of it this way. We practice noting method for who knows how long, days, months, years, decades. We're very good at it. But noting method only looks at one at a time. By visualizing a waterfall or a river, it's like we're noting the entire gosh darn thing all at once. Like we're noting all distractions at once. Doesn't that make sense as the natural next step? This is my point. Instead of telling our minds that the goal is to use noting method to gradually reduce the distractions, the next step, the next spiritual level, the next level of attainment, the next level of ability should be to master noting method by taking a step back and noting the gosh darn total thing, all of it, all at once. And you can. If you're comfortable enough with yourself after a bunch of noting that you know what distractions are like, and you are to the point where there aren't any distractions, I guess, like distractions which are so big that they just escape and cause all sorts of chaos. If you're to the point where your mind is calm enough from noting that you're not completely distracted, but you still have a lot of distractions. If you're to the point where you can sit, comfortably for 5 minutes without leaving, this is a very low standard, I hope you can see. Then perhaps it is time to try noting it all at once. It doesn't have to be a waterfall. That's just my favorite. River is good. Look, this is why yogis like to stare at rivers, okay? There's a Zen, plenty of Zen stories about that, right? This might be why. You could even just imagine your thoughts as passing clouds. That makes sense, right? Clouds are much like waterfalls or rivers. They're passing. I think that's the more traditional Buddhist thing to do. Imagining your thoughts as clouds. That goes back thousands of years. I like that because weather is naturally dynamic. Any dynamic system, any rich system with a lot going on can work. I guess you could even imagine like a busy city. I think maybe clouds were the original example that Buddhists recommend using because, well, that was the most dramatic thing around, right? The monsoon clouds of India. It's a that that has about the right level of energy. It's dynamic and intense enough to properly embody the insanity of our minds. You can't choose something that's small, right? It has to be. I like a big booming waterfall, tremendous dark clouds. Who knows? Maybe they're raining, wind. The idea is give yourself permission and conjure up a landscape that is as chaotic as necessary to properly describe what is happening in your mind. And I think you'd be surprised. I think people are a lot better at this than they might think. If you just try to think like, well, what type of craziness would it be if my mind were a place? The images just pop to mind immediately. And then the trick is to be patient. So congratulations, you've found some sort of metaphor for your mind. You found some sort of imagery that properly explains what is going on in your crazy, crazy mind. Congratulations. You've found something that works. Now, you just have to sit on your cushion, okay? And just sort of take it all in. Just visualize this. This is your visual mind. And do this for as long as you can. The longer, the better. The amount of time that you visualize it is like slowly unturning the screw on the pipe of our minds. The more that you can visualize, the more that you can open up these energy channels. It's just a level. Okay? I mean, if you visualize for 1 minute, can do this much. Visualize for 10 minutes, an hour. And it's all it takes is just to focus on this image and just watch it and let it evolve. That's all it takes. It's like, I think maybe the valves on a pipe is not the best metaphor because a valve is something that you just turn once and then it stays there. But this is a much more dynamic system. Whatever it is that opens or closes the channels, the energy channels of our minds and bodies, is something that's alive. It's constantly changing, expanding, contracting. If we can focus on visualizing the flow, then that will keep it open. And the idea is that we do that long enough, just long enough so that the energy levels in our minds can decrease from critical chronic anxiety down to something manageable. Doesn't have to disappear completely, but or even at all. You know, what really is best? A mind completely empty of distractions? Well, it might be the most like true mind in a Buddhist sense, but you can't do anything with it. You need mental energy to do things. You need something between overflowing and empty. And if you remember, because we're Buddhist, I imagine, Buddhism is about a middle path. Between extremes. Buddhism is always about between extremes, which doesn't mean that it's, the least exciting option. It means you maintain just enough so that you maintain the most amount of distraction possible that you can handle without it tipping over. And if it does, then I hope you have methods to let it flow out somewhere. That can happen. But if you can master that and have some visuals that usually work, then you can keep your mind energy brimming full, able to be used for anything you might want to, for marathons, for late nights at the office, for coding, for gaming, who knows, whatever you want to do with life. You can now use your mental energy and not get distracted by the times when it overflows and causes chaos. And maintaining this just means keeping an eye on these valves and letting them evolve over time. Something will work some days, others it won't. Some visuals might work some days, but not others. And then the visuals themselves will evolve over time. The waterfall might not always be the best visual to use. Or maybe that sense of flow that you get from visualizing a waterfall, maybe over time, it starts to decrease. And then you start to realize that you're in a different territory. And that's a very different kind of spiritual development. Can't get into that now. That's not really the point. I hope that if everyone can have more ways to work with their energy flows, then the world will be a better place. And that's enough for now.